You have to.
Song that written by Neil Minay that encompasses all its life form, the spirits, grandmother, moon, grandfather, the insects, the trees, the bugs, everything. So that's going to be our first song, and I believe Sharon is going to lead us off in that.
Okay, yeah, yeah.
This song is a strong woman's song. We've got a few more minutes, so here we go. Thank you. Are we on now? Thank you very much for coming. Before we get underway with the presentation, my name is Tony Piggott. I am part of the working group called the Georgian Bay Geopark Network. And to begin today's event, I would like to read an important acknowledgement on behalf of the Midland Cultural Center. The Midland Cultural Center recognizes that it is located on the land which is the traditional and treaty territory of the Anishinaabe people, now known as the Chippewa Tri-Council, comprised of Bosley First Nation, Rama First Nation, and Georgina Island First Nation. This treaty is within the Pre-Confederation Treaty 5 and Treaty 16 and included within the Williams Treaty of 1923. The Midland Cultural Center also recognizes that it is located on land which was once the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat, and that our community is home to many citizens of the Métis Nation of Ontario and to a large and diverse community of Indigenous peoples. I would now like to ask Jack Conton, who is part of the working group, to make an introduction to a very important person.
Thank you, Tony. Arlene Beaujeu, Jack Disnakaz, Dojaba, Henry Inlet First Nation, Dodam Amek, Bindigan, and welcome. As with tradition, we would like to begin with an opening prayer, and I would like to invite Senator Gwen Lindsay from the Georgian Bay Métis Council to do this. Senator?
Tanchi, bonjour. I consider it, first of all, a privilege to be here. Thank you for allowing me to be a part of this. Our prayer is, O Lord our God, creator of the universe, we thank you for your magnificence. We thank you for this majestic display of your grandeur, your splendor in the unique creation of Georgian Bay. Today we honor you as the masterful artist of this beautiful land, for no other hand could design with such awe as you have. We are blessed to be stewards of this land because of your master plan. We thank you that this land will continue to be a blessing and a source of hope and inspiration to all who are privileged to be touched by its beauty. Your word declares, from the top of the rocks, I see him. Today we see you in the beauty of your holiness, and we thank you for our land. Merci. Miigwech.
Thank you, Senator Lindsay, very much. I would now like to thank you for coming here, despite the fact it's the most beautiful day in August. So I appreciate the sacrifice. I hope it will be worth your while. We're very excited to share a vision for a UNESCO Geopark here in Georgian Bay, and our purpose today is to give you a sense of what that could possibly be, how it would work, and the benefits that could come to the communities all around Georgian Bay. And we hope at the end of all of this you will feel motivated to be in touch and to get involved in one way or another. There are going to be a few of us presenting today to give you a sense of all of this, and I'd like to make some introductions. You have met Jack Conton, who is based in Midland, has tremendous experience around Georgian Bay, is, among many other things, going to be doing outreach to many of the First Nation community and Métis groups in Georgian Bay. So Jack will be speaking during the overview. Kirsten Kennedy is a postdoctoral fellow from University of Toronto and is leading an important research project that has been underway with the support of the Midland Cultural Center, as well as the federal government and individual donors. And she's going to be telling you about some of the exciting possibilities and some of the techniques that are going to be used that will enhance our understanding of Georgian Bay, that can really make a difference down the road. And finally, Professor Nick Isles. Some of you would know of Nick through his books, his teachings. He is a professor of geology at the University of Toronto. He says he's from the Paleozoic age. He tells me it's 40 years since he's been at U of T. And he will be giving you what I regard as a really compelling overview for the geological story of this part of the world. I would also, of course, like to thank these fantastic drummers and singers, the Chickamick. Thank you very much for being part of this and for welcoming us in such a warm and appropriate way. So I would now like to just start this story. And to begin, I'm just going to show you a few really interesting parts of the world. This is taken from the Izu Peninsula in Japan. This is one of the more dramatic parts of southern China. This is from the Shetland Islands, which you would all know about. And finally, Beaujolais, France. What these places have in common is that they are all UNESCO geoparks. They are 4 of 177 UNESCO geoparks around the world in 46 countries. The most recent one is actually in Canada, called the Cliffs of Fundy and stretches about 140 kilometers along the Bay of Fundy, including about a dozen communities, 4 different provincial parks, and is a good illustration of what geoparks are and what they are not. Geoparks are not conventional parks as you might think of them when you go through a gate and there is a boundary and possibly even fees. Geoparks don't have any land restrictions or affect any title. What they are a very modern idea of creating a framework through which, through sites that are extremely significant illustrations of important geology and culture, become part of a community and the way that community celebrates where it is, to invite new people into it and to influence the way people behave when they are there. And of course, to generate opportunity, which we will speak to later on in the presentation. But there have been studies done around the world about the impact of geoparks. We're going to touch on things that we've learned in those important pieces of research about the impact on the community and the benefits that can accrue from being a UNESCO geopark over time. So with that in mind, I would now like to ask Nick Isles to give us the big picture on how extraordinary the rocks are here.
Thank you, Tony. What a great crowd, eh? I just want to thank the Midland Cultural Centre for providing these excellent facilities. And I've got an onerous task this afternoon because I've got to get through 2.5 billion years of Earth history in about, what, 15 minutes or something?
Yeah, that's
so
right.
I'm either going to speak really quickly or I'm going to leave a lot out, and I'll probably do about both. So I'm a geologist. I've been a geologist since I was 16. That was back in the Precambrian. And we use a lot of analytical techniques. We use chemistry, physics, a lot of sometimes engineering, a lot of computing. But, you know, the bottom line is we're big storytellers. And if you travel around the world, there are places that tell stories about the evolution of the planet. The planet's about 4.5 billion years old. And Georgian Bay is one of those places that tells a lot of stories because we have 2.5 billion years of Earth history preserved on our doorstep. So just up there, we have more than half of the Earth's evolution recorded in a pretty small place, close to major cities, close to communities. It's accessible. So very quickly, you'll see a lot of different colors on this map. And this is the Canadian Shield up here, old hard rocks, lots of lakes, lots of forests, not much agriculture. Very different cultural history. The oldest rocks up here, about 2.5, and as you come through French River down into Oshago, Wabashine, you get into about billion-year-old rocks. And you'll see lots of different colors. It looks like a bit of a mosaic, jigsaw puzzle. And all the pieces in the jigsaw puzzle are pieces of crust that have arrived from somewhere else, a bit like immigrants, really, and been added to North America. So we've learned a lot about how continents grow by looking at the geology of Georgian Bay. And then, of course, once you hit Wabashine, Washago, you get into what we call the cover rocks. These are much younger rocks, younger than about 500 million, and they've got fossils in. So these give rise to the Niagara Escarpment, very different landscapes, very different cultural traditions. So basically, as you go clockwise around the bay, you go into younger and younger rocks. And then, of course, what you can't see on there is the imprint of huge ice sheets during ice ages of the last 2.5 million years. And then at the end of the last glaciation about 10,000 years ago, which is nothing, the first Paleo-Indians start arriving as the ice sheets just beginning to move out of Georgian Bay. So you've got an incredible record of crustal growth, continental evolution. You've got a record of these younger sedimentary rocks with a lot of marine fossils. It tells us about ecosystems at that time, 500 million years ago. You've got glaciation, and then you've got the cultural response to climate as well. So that's what I've got to get through. Okay, so one of the big storytellers of Georgian Bay is Tusa Wilson, who you've probably heard of. very famous geologist from U of T, died in 1993. Now, you're probably sitting there quite still, listening to what I've got to say, but you're not still, actually. You're on the move. And by this time tomorrow, if you can remember what I said now, your house, this building, you will have moved by the thickness of a piece of paper, because we're on the North American plate, and we're being pushed westward by about 3.75 centimeters a year, which is a decent-sized book. Over a lifetime, your lifetime is about my height, and over millions and billions of years, we can completely reconfigure the shape of the Earth's surface. We can reconfigure where the continents are, where oceans are, and so on. And Tuzo Wilson spent a lot of time around the bay. Some of you may remember that he actually spent a lot of time sailing in his 5-ton Chinese junk. Very appropriate for the times, I suppose. But he got inspiration for this model from Georgian Bay. So in many ways, Georgian Bay is the home of plate tectonics. And there's another individual, too, much less heralded than Tuzo. Most people have never heard of him. This is Tom Crow. And he developed a dating method. All right, we're storytellers, but we need to say when things happened. And he took very simple zircon crystals, beautiful things. They're about the same width as your hair. So they're very small. You can't see them. You need a microscope. You need special extraction techniques to get them out of rocks. And this is what they look like when you cut them in half. And they've grown through time, but they contain what we call unstable uranium isotopes. They're radioactive. They break down over time, and over billions of years, millions of years, they produce lead. So it's a very simple exercise to throw a laser, and you'll see it's got holes in there, and that's where a laser beam in the lab has been aimed at the crystal, vaporizes it, produces a plasma. You can suck it into what we call a mass spectrometer, and you can measure the amount of lead, and that tells you about the age. So at last, we can put page numbers on events in Earth history. And this was developed in Georgian Bay. So again, there's another one of these world-beating concepts, world-beating methodologies that originated here in Georgian Bay. So there's been thousands, tens of thousands of zircon age dates produced around the world. There's different labs to make sure there's agreement in the results and so on. And pretty early on, people recognized these magic numbers. And you'll see that there's the number of zircon crystals, this is the number of ages, and then there is the age themselves. And they all fall into these peaks, and people began to think, well, what on earth do these peaks mean? We now know, because of studies of the rocks in Georgian Bay, that zircons are produced in rocks of volcanic origin. So if you see peaks in the distribution of zircon ages through Earth history, that's times on the planet when volcanic activity was at a maximum. And these we now know are times of supercontinents, where all the continents which today are dispersed, moving apart, are now clustered together. And you get a lot of volcanic activity, and you get maximum production of zircons. So this is a huge insight into how our planet has evolved. There's this supercontinent cycle, where the continents are together, then they move apart. And this is the last one we know about. This is one we know best. This is what we call Pangaea. Pangaea, of course, you know you're Greek, don't you? What does Pangaea mean? All of the Earth, yes, clustered together, surrounded by Panthalassa, which is all of the water. And this broke apart about 180 million years ago, and the phase we're in now is continents drifting apart and so on. But you can project that into the future, because now we are just starting the phase where continents will start to come together. And you can, that map I showed previously of plates, there were arrows on there. You can plot the direction of plate movement. We're moving westward. The Pacific Ocean is actually closing. It's what we call a dying ocean, as big as it is. And the next supercontinent the center of it will be somewhere in Southeast Asia. That's the direction in which every plate is moving. So yes, folks, the next supercontinent will be made in China. Anyway, that's a basic ordering system in Earth history. And if you look at Georgian Bay, it records 4 or 5 of these supercontinents, all up there in a relatively small place. So we can see the processes are at work whereby crust was added to North America and whereby North America grew. And the process involves building of big mountains because you're colliding crust together, you're thickening the crust. So we talk about analogs in geology. So if you want to study what the process is involved, you go to places like the Himalaya, huge mountains. And this is what Georgian Bay would have looked like on several occasions when these crustal blocks were being added to eastern North America. But as pretty as the Himalayas are, you can't see below them. You can't see what's happening to the rocks themselves. And the beauty about Georgian Bay is that we have these old mountain ranges. This is the La Cloche Range, which you all know about, and this is recording a major plate collision about 1.8 billion years ago. And my colleague Kirsten will take you on a virtual field trip. She'll get you out of this room. I know it's good weather outside, so she's going to take you on a virtual field trip through a major plate collision 1.8 billion years ago. There's another one. If you spend any time in the 30,000 Islands, you'll know all about the banded gneisses. There's big boulders out here that have been brought down by ice sheets and scattered all over the place. Beautiful banding, and that banding we can reconstruct in the lab. We can actually torture rocks in the lab, find out what temperatures minerals grow and what temperatures and pressures they need to deform. And these rocks were formed 30 or 40 kilometers underground. So I find that amazing, that you're walking over material that was something like hot wax, temperatures about 1400 degrees centigrade, many thousand times atmospheric pressures, and those rocks were beginning to deform like wax, hot wax or hot toffee. And that's what I call the smoking gun of plate tectonics, because what are plates riding on? Why is North America moving to the west? These thick plates. Well, they're moving over this stuff. So this gives geologists really unique insights into how plates move, how mountains are built, and so on. And it's here in Georgian Bay. So these are these gneisses. It's a German word, but it gives rise to the expression, have a nice day. Yeah, okay, sorry. Hot wax, 30, 40 kilometers underground. And then we have these shear zones, which very, very quickly record very intense deformation at great depth between crustal blocks. And one of the most famous ones is the Parry Sound shear zone. You drive through it every time you go up Highway 400. It's near the turnoff, the main turnoff, Parry Sound, all right? Well, those stripy rocks, those stripy rocks are 30, 40 kilometers down. There's a whole bunch of different highly metamorphosed, highly strained rocks in there. You'll notice a number, C5 moon rocks. Well, we've done that around the bay. Kirsten is going to tell you more about that, but we've now established about 100 geosites for geotourism. They're all on a brand new website that Tony will tell you about later on. And people can go there, or you can, next February, when everything is under 6 feet of snow, you can be in your living room and visit different parts of Georgian Bay. Anyway, world-class geology on our doorstep, and that's why we want to set up this UNESCO Global Geopark. We have a global story to tell around the world. It's that important. Some of you may recognize this picture. It's been cropped a bit, but these are the banded gneisses on Ed Bartram's island. So these have been inspirational for artists and the like. And then we come to the cover rocks, much younger stuff. This is for the first time when organisms are so common they now dominate the rock types. So these are the limestones you find along the Niagara Escarpment. And one of the most common constituents, of course, are these crinoids, otherwise known as sea lilies. These would have been waving from the seafloor. Ontario was at the equator at this time. So these are warm tropical seas. These are reefs, and then these get broken up in storms, and then the final rock is composed of these fragments of the stems. Then a whole bunch of time goes past. The rock record is something like a hard drive, and there's huge gaps, and that's where you need some intuition, guesswork to find out what the hell happened, to fill the gaps. But this is the last episode, and in many ways, I wouldn't say it's the most important, but it's the episode that forms Georgian Bay. Because these are big ice sheets, and we think there's been about 50 of these over the last 2.5 million years. And they are about 3 kilometers thick in the center, and they outflow. So they are moving radially outwards from their center towards the margins. So you can see you had loads coming down into the Great Lakes. And at the bases, they had dirt, debris. So they're like giant sheets of sandpaper, which are rubbing at the rocks. And Georgian Bay, Lake Huron, Ontario, Erie, Michigan are all a product of glacial erosion. So that, to a geologist, they're quite recent features. So there's Georgian Bay with all the water taken out. That's the product of ice sheets over the last couple of million years. Those ice sheets also left a lot of sediments, very important for agriculture in the south, for groundwater and all that sort of stuff. So this is the project that Kirsten touched on a little earlier, because we're now using very high resolution mapping methods, and you can literally see the landscape for the first time. It's absolutely incredible, the detail that is now coming out about the nature of these ancient ice sheets, but she'll tell you about that in a second. And then, of course, the big event in terms of culture is at the end of the glaciation, when ice is pulling to the north, it's still blocking the St. Lawrence, it's still blocking the Ottawa Valley, and that's the normal outflow from Great Lake waters. So there are these high-level lakes dammed, and the most famous one around here is, of course, Algonquin. And you can just see the shoreline. Next time you go skiing or whatever at Blue Mountain, you actually ski over the old shoreline. You can see how high it is above the lake level. And around the margin of the lake are these very significant archaeological finds. I'm drawing on the work here of Peter Stork from the Royal Ontario Museum. And these are hunter-gatherer camps that were set up of what were called Paleo-Indians, very hardy people, chasing caribou. There would have been woolly mammoth, bears running around, all sorts of things. But this is the first human imprint of people in the Great Lakes right at the end of the glaciation. And there's some interesting stories about ice runners, people that were moving across the ice looking for patches of vegetation, because that would attract the caribou. There's also fantastic stories about the great white turtle being sat on, and then somebody punctures it, and water comes out, and the land rises. Some of the creation myths, absolutely fantastic. And they're all borne out by the geologic history, because these ice sheets sit on the land surface, they force it down, and then it rises back up. So these are a few of the stories that we can weave and tell for a global audience from Bay. And the key story is that, the modern landscapes that you see today weren't formed in the way that you see them now, but they have a million, sometimes billion-year history. So you may have deserving nephews and nieces that are looking for Christmas presents. If you're interested to know more about the geology, the culture, archaeology, the ecology too, don't forget that the ecology reflects the geology too, because it creates different substrates. Here's a book that we put together with one of our partner organizations in the Geopark, the Georgian Bay Land Trust. And I'll just finish. I know I've gone on a bit, but I did have 2.5 billion years to get through. Yeah, it's a little dark there, but we will get visited by a committee. There's a national committee, there's an international committee in Unesco, and they will examine us, if you like. They'll examine the case for a geopark based on the geological legacy. Fantastic. The potential for further research. Fantastic. And then also the opportunities for community engagement, geotourism, sustainable tourism, and so on. So I'm going to finish, you'll be pleased to know, and I'm going to hand it over to Jack, and he's going to tell you something about the cultural aspects.
While Jack is coming up there, thank you. I would just, I was remiss in saying that the ingredients of a geopark are obviously, on a fundamental level, the geology, the extraordinary geology you just heard, but the influence of that geology on the way human habitation and culture have evolved. And that is in part what Jack is going to speak to.
Thank you. I hope I got this right. Is that right? Next.
That's it.
Perfect. Well, first of all, let me say this is the first time I've been on stage with some real rock stars. I'm going to tell the story of the indigenous perspective. I think it begins pretty well 11,000 years ago. There was occupation of the Paleo archaic people that resided around Georgian Bay. And it begins the story of the connection to the land, of how we value the land. We can only imagine what it was like when there was glaciation, when there was a huge lake called Lake Algonquin. And the people that resided around these areas, particularly on Georgian Bay, we do have some sites located in Collingwood, the Holland Marsh, and Manitoulin. And it's interesting with the scientific side of things where archaeology has found lithics. It tells the story of where these lithics came from. Some came locally, some came from far away. But it's interesting to understand the transition, the involvement of people and its first people. It's really a part that we will also discover new things as we do archaeology in the coming future, because it's going to tell the story more, but we can only imagine how it evolved, because today indigenous people value the land as a very important piece, and I believe that the Geopark is a good connector to making things happen for our people and the people that currently live on Georgian Bay. So it's an exciting project for me and for the people that I will be contacted through consultation. Let me get this here. Sorry, just give me a second. Am I going to go backwards?
You can go back. That's it.
As I said, we have evolved through time, and people have come to live on Georgian Bay. Started with the early age, 11,000 years ago. As we progress over time, we get into periods where we listen to the stories of the Anishinaabe people, and it's in their stories of the migration into this area from the East Coast. And it was formed that they settled throughout the Great Lakes and on Georgian Bay. It's really fascinating to hear the stories, the legends that come with the connection to the land. And we're always learning these lessons that are told by our elders of what life was like. And I think it's so important that we continue to make these legends and stories come alive. And I think this is what will happen when we develop the Geopark sites, as well as the digital technology world of having hubs where people can access this information about the past. It's a great opportunity for the indigenous people to tell their story. And it's a right step when we do land acknowledgement to understand that it is a way to reconcile and a way to bring health to ourselves, but to the health of the land. That's the most important part in the protection of our water, particularly Georgian Bay. The global world will see this as we develop the Geopark. And I'm really honored to be part of this. Historically, the bay has become a transportation route It always has been and will continue. And as we evolve through time, with the influx of European people coming in, it's great to understand how society has developed and evolved over time. And it's brought a new people, and I'm proud to announce that, in this presentation that we have the Métis people to become part of this in storytelling. So it's an honor, and it's great to have the senator here to do the opening prayer. And it acknowledges that we all have a responsibility and a story to tell, and the Métis people do have that story to tell. So it's an honor to have him here perform, as well as work with him in the future to move forward. Now, I hope I get this right. Am I going the wrong direction again? Sorry. Somehow am I going the right way here, guys?
Yeah, no, you're going the right way. So,
Okay.
this,
Sorry about that, folks.
that's okay. No, the point of our Geopark components, essentially, and the power of Georgian Bay, is that the history and culture that has emerged from it is deeply influenced by, of course, the landscape and the geology, and that's touched on such a long period of history, including fundamental building blocks of modern Canada as well. Shipbuilding, shipping, Midland has been an incredibly important engine for that. So that's part of the story and part of the opportunity overall.
Well, thank you, Tony. I guess we're just at the stage. I'm not quite sure I got the building.
No, but the point now is that how do we go about building Georgian Bay Geopark?
Right.
We are at the very beginning of that, and we just wanted to share some of the basic building blocks that are going to underpin it.
And I think from the Indigenous side, building the Geopark, I just wanted to mention that we do have a group called the Indigenous Leader Team, comprised of individuals from the community in this particular area to conduct information sessions to understand what is needed to collect to build this partnership. So it's the part of the building process. We've conducted already some presentations to the First Nations, and they've liked the concept. They are considering to support the initiative. So it's part of the building process that we have to do, but also we will learn to ensure that we're incorporating the thoughts of the people that live on the land. How we do this is really a way that we want to incorporate some guiding principles, and from this we hope to apply some technology based with the original way of how we communicate from the Indigenous perspective. And from that, we want to incorporate the dish with one spoon, wampum covenant. And what is that? What does that really mean? Well, it was an early treaty that was signed with the Indigenous people and the government, as well as other First Nations. And what it means is that we are going to be looking at a shared responsibility in the protection of Mother Earth. And this can be applied to the Geopark. That is one of the mandates that's incorporated. So we wanted to see how this could be applied in a modern context. So that's a very important piece of information that will move us forward in working together collaboratively. Now, hope I get this right, Dan.
Bingo.
The other portion of this is, I'm not quite sure if you ever heard the concept two-eyed seeing. two-eyed seeing was introduced by an elder on the East Coast in the 2000s. And what this means is that it's putting the indigenous perspective in balance with the scientific eye and trying to find a way to work together. So, as an example, we like to apply the concept of what is traditional knowledge and what the scientific knowledge is. If we can find a happy balance to move forward, this is what the two-eyed seeing is about, is bringing the people together to come up with a way to build a relationship, to work together to protect a beautiful part of this world, which is Georgian Bay. So the two-eyed seeing process will be applied. So it's understanding the indigenous perspective and the non-indigenous perspective and coming together. So we're going to be applying this in our approach. And we all heard of the 7 grandfather teachings. These are guidelines that help us work together. We're going to be applying these principles when we sit down with the community to collect information out of respect and work together towards building the Geopark in the years to come. Now, is that the right slide? The next aspect is, sorry about this, because my correspondence here, I was making sure that I've got the right slide. The goal is to develop over 100 plus geosites around Georgian Bay, but it will also incorporate reaching out to the indigenous communities to find out what exactly other potential sites could emerge in this development. And it's understanding looking at the landscape, the cultural connection that indigenous people have. In my discoveries, I found that we have waterways on Georgian Bay that were used by the indigenous people in their migration into the interior during the various seasons. So they're telling, from the learning is that they went into the interior of the watershed to live during various seasons. And these are now used as canoe routes, the transportation routes, the cottage. You look at the Moon River, you look at the Muskoka River, and they all have indigenous settlements. So the value of that is understanding what these sites would mean in terms of getting a better picture in the modern storytelling that we're going to use in the digital formation. And what are the First Nations geocultural sites? We know that we've learned from our lessons and through storytelling that are told to us by our ancestors and passed down. For example, in this area, we know how Midland and Penetang and this area was formed by Kitchikwana. And the Giant's Tomb is a fantastic example of that landscape. And that could be included in the storytelling. So it's identifying all these sites that are potential in discovery. And we only get these stories by understanding it from our elders as well as from the indigenous communities. So that's one of the goals that we'll be collecting as we speak with the various First Nations and Métis councils on Georgian Bay. So it's pretty interesting from that perspective what the opportunities will be for the future of the development of this park. So, not park, but the geo initiative. Now, I guess we're complete here. Is that right?
Yep.
So I'd like to thank you very much for looking at the opportunity to share the information and what the outreach we'll be doing to the communities around Georgian Bay. Great.
As Jack alluded to, the underpinnings of the park, so to speak, are multiple geosites. We expect more than 100, and in fact, in a couple of minutes, Kirsten is going to come up and give you examples of that because it's already in motion. The fact that it would be based on more than 100 geosites around Georgian Bay, that Georgian Bay is such a vast area with multiple communities, really begs the question of how on earth we do this and we bring it alive for people and allow engagement across such a diverse and complex territory. And the answer, in part, is to use technology to the fullest. So what I'd like to talk to for a minute here is how the Georgian Bay Geopark web platform and social media are going to be the true engine and enabler for the Geopark to come alive and to bring it alive for many, many people who may never even come to Georgian Bay. And this begins with how each of these 100 sites will be brought alive. You've undoubtedly seen as you go through the internet yourself, whether you're taking a look at a new home or a vacation, the technology to bring locations alive is fantastic. And we intend to use that to the fullest in every place. I'm going to show you a 20-second clip using ground LiDAR to illustrate the kind of experience that we can create for these sites. I hope this works. Of course it doesn't. There you go. Yes. So that's very crude, but still gives you a sense that we believe we can create an experience in these different places where people may be sitting at a university in Germany and feel like they are here, and give people a really vivid sense of what Georgian Bay has to offer. Every site will also be able to go into the history that is either immediately or adjacent to it and relevant, and we'll be able to speak to that and bring that alive in very vivid ways as well. Importantly, there will be, as Jack was alluding to, the two-eyed seeing concept. There will be narratives there that will be accessible as well. We would hope that that could be something that you could see, read, or if you've been on an art gallery tour with earphones, it's a great opportunity to listen to stories, and possibly in multiple languages. So any given site is not just a place that you may go and walk, hopefully with slippers and very low impact, but also to experience at home or at school in a way that really brings alive the depth that Georgian Bay represents. Now, that brings us to Kirsten and this whole notion, very important notion, of the role of education in the creation of the Geopark. Kirsten.
So as Tony alluded to, one of the really important roles of a geopark is in creating educational content that we can put into schools and that we can share with the public. And we've already put in a little bit of work in creating some of these educational activities and these outreach items. So one thing that I just wanted to show you quickly, this will be available on our website, which the link will be posted at the end of this presentation, are a number of these geosites, these 100+ geosites. So we have a web page already. You can go to it, and I'm just going to switch to this now, where if you visit any of these sites, we have different themes, fossils, earth history, all sorts of different topics. You can click on any of them and information will come up which will let you know a little bit about the geology of that site. So just as an example, I'm going to go to Painted Rocks. And as you can see, there's a little blurb about it. You can read all about it, learn a little bit about that site that you might not have known previously. There are pictures and maps and lots of really good information. We can go over to the other side of the bay and contrast what we saw on the north side of Georgian Bay with the south, go to Fossil Hill, Manitoulin Island, and again, pictures, descriptions, what types of fossils you might find at Fossil Hill, and get some really good information. We've also gone and, in our quest to make educational material, we've made a number of what we call sort of detailed virtual field trips to, I think we've got about 8 right now, different places all across the bay. And I'm just going to show you an example of one through the La Cloche Range. This is a really important site. The rocks here are 2.4 billion years old, so really, really old. They're all sort of folded up into this crazy structure. And we can kind of just go right along the road and pick out different places of interest. So I'm just going to show you what this looks like, and I had to bend away from the microphone to do so. So we start off, and as Nick said, geology is a science of storytelling. So we tell the story, we set the stage. What was going on in the world 2.4 billion years ago? Where was the Georgian Bay at that time? So we paint the picture, and then we go to different sites, and we can zoom right in on them and show what different rock types are there and how they got there. I'm now going to switch there. So this is just a quick overview of some of these really detailed virtual field trips that you'll be able to access already online, work we've already sort of done. And as you can see, we go all around the bay. We're not picky. We like geology everywhere we go. And each place has its own unique, arrangement of topics that we can talk about. We can talk about old supercontinents, like Nick was mentioning in his talk. We can talk about ice sheets, landforms, all sorts of things. Each place has a really unique story to tell. The second thing I wanted to talk about is research. So geoparks are amazing vessels for research to happen. The Georgian Bay has been instrumental in many aspects of geological research in the past, and we hope to continue that going forward with this project. So currently I'm doing a project on the Georgian Bay, which is in conjunction with the Midland Cultural Center. They really helped to make this project become a reality. And we can integrate with all sorts of different conservation agencies that are already active along the bay. And just to tell you a little bit about what I'm doing, I'm using a new tool called LiDAR. It's not really that new, but it's the same thing now. It's getting integrated in autonomous cars so they can see where they're going. It's all over the place. But my particular LiDAR device is going to be embedded on a drone, and it flies over fields and it creates really high resolution images of the landscape. And this is useful for a lot of reasons. I use it to look at where glaciers went, is my sort of specialty. But we can also use it to make three-dimensional models of the landscape to investigate things like where there has been coastal erosion or landslips. We can use it to look at different vegetation and talk about why is there one type of vegetation in one place and one other type of vegetation, down the road a little ways. We can use it to look at infrastructure. We can use it for all sorts of different purposes. So this is an example of, you use this machine on a drone, fly it over a field, and you can get three-dimensional images of things like forests and buildings, and it's a really, really interesting tool. So I use it to look at these landforms. They're called drumlins, and they tell us about where the ice went during the last glaciation. Where did it flow? We can even look at things like how fast it flowed and how it affected the material that it flowed over. So they're really beautiful images that allow us to see the landscape in a way that has really not been done before at really high resolution. I always like this image just because I think it's kind of cool. We see actual places where, we talked about Lake Algonquin earlier. There were icebergs in Lake Algonquin, and they would float around and they would make big scratches through the sediment. And, we didn't really know how many there were. Now we can look and find out. So that's everything I wanted to talk about. And back to you, Tony.
Thank you, Kirsten. Nick, I wonder if you wanted to add anything about the overall opportunities of comprehensive research for Georgian Bay and partnerships.
Yeah, as I touched on in my talk, one of the things they look at, UNESCO, is the potential for further research. And I think we've touched on a number of issues this afternoon. There's enormous potential for education, university, college, school research, to come out of the Bay and to learn more about Earth history. And I think that's the point, that we can, because of the geologic record around the Bay, we can locally understand what's happened globally. So there's enormous potential. And then, as Kirsten has described, new technologies come along all the time. So the questions we can pose in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years are going to be completely different from what we can do now. So it's pretty exciting stuff, actually.
Thank you, Nick. And so in totality, the opportunities around the global Georgian Bay Geopark for all of Georgian Bay are really a function of how much a showcase this is of the Georgian Bay on a very localized basis. And the benefits that it can mean for communities, organizations, research groups, and whatnot is really what is important here. So in getting to the end of this so that we can open to the floor and look for comments and questions from everybody and some dialogue, I just wanted to top line those things that are opportunities as this geopark emerges. It's going to take a couple of years to get this off the ground. We are at the outset now where we are reaching out to form partnerships with organizations, municipalities, research groups, and citizens. And we think the motivation for that is the love of Georgian Bay and the showcase that it represents, but also some really concrete things. There have been studies done around the world on geoparks and what the impact is on the communities that are in them or adjacent to them. And it comes down to really measurable improvements in areas of tourism, of economic development and business, of areas of the ability to understand, better understand the environment and factors around climate change, to influence the way regions approach their planning in terms of development, as well as education. And so just to be a little bit more specific, I've mentioned that there is going to be a georgianbaygeopark.com and all of the attendant social media possibilities there. This becomes an important marketing platform and an important platform for collaboration. So one of the immediate areas is for further promotion of existing destinations across Georgian Bay. And of course, here in the Midland Penetang area, there are no shortage of fantastic destinations, and these would obviously be linked and promoted. The opportunity to promote businesses and services, because we see the potential of attracting geotourism, even the opportunity for the right kind of expansion within the communities, we see businesses and services possibly emerging. And I'm going to get into some of the new ones that we've seen from around the world. In several dozen geoparks, they've actually created geofoods, for example. And those have found their way into restaurants, but also onto people's shelves. There are marketplaces and e-commerce opportunities to link businesses within the region. There are new businesses that can emerge to cater to both the tourist opportunities as well as educational activities that are going to emerge. And very importantly, and this is a huge part of what we're here today to talk about, are partnerships, where geoparks link up with everyone from, for example, the very significant UNESCO biosphere that stretches from Severn up past Parry Sound, where we can collaborate with them to find ways to enhance the profile of their work and to further create research depth in the understanding of the shore of Georgian Bay, but also the Cultural Alliance here and all of the partnership networks that already exist in the Midland Penetang area. What possibilities are there to create even stronger connections and historical links to the different geosites and the stories that are going to be emerging out of the geopark? We also, of course, look at businesses, and boating is a very important factor here, and we anticipate that this is going to influence the way boaters look at Georgian Bay and explore it. So community partnerships are enormously important to the success of the park. And to Nick's point about research, the idea of a comprehensive picture of Georgian Bay, enhanced by the knowledge that comes out of research activities like this very detailed coastal mapping and LIDAR, and the interweaving of other sources, give us the opportunity to provide those packages of insights and information to communities, municipalities, to help them in fully understanding the possibilities down the road when it comes to municipal planning. Ditto for schools, both high schools and post-secondary, where the fantastic work that you saw, early examples of Kirsten's work, can really help tell our kids more about this and to advance our understanding of Georgian Bay at an academic level. And the MyTax, Georgian Bay Land Trust, collaboration that we're doing with LIDAR is a very good example of, I think, the ability to enrich through collaboration our understanding of Georgian Bay to affect our reaction to climate change and all the things that we're witnessing every day. And also thinking of this region and others, there are gateway opportunities. Midland is the gateway to the 30,000 islands. We are currently working with the Midland Cultural Center as a fantastic partner in the early stages of the development of the Geopark. We think that there will be a Georgian Bay Geopark Center. We also anticipate that there will be hubs in different parts of Georgian Bay that celebrate and showcase the Geopark, create opportunities for people to visit and learn, and to help direct them in what they might want to do. So we hope that that first center will in fact be right here in the Midland Penetang area, and possibly here at the Midland Cultural Center. And lastly, just to reinforce what I think you're already sensing, the Georgian Bay UNESCO Geopark is completely reliant on the interest and engagement of communities. And what has happened in places like the Bay of Fundy, where I showed you a little bit about the Cliffs of Fundy UNESCO Geopark, is that communities see the potential and the opportunities, and they participate in, for example, the selection and management of sites, in the enhancement of the showcasing and marketing and communication, in the research and the connection to local schools and the like. And the model that UNESCO has created is one whereby the technology through the website provides the tools, the guidelines, the networks, the resources that local communities access in order to really implement and bring alive the geopark for their particular part of Georgian Bay. And that is the process that we are currently just starting. So that is basically the quick trip on the geopark vision for Georgian Bay that we are hoping you will engage with today. It's, I think, a very, very effective way to create a framework to bring so much energy, creativity, and work that is done and will be done together in an even more potent way to create a resilient Georgian Bay, a Georgian Bay that has opportunities for tourism and employment and education, and really deepen our understanding of how we can protect Georgian Bay over time. And so I'd like to conclude. We will have a questions and answers in a minute by thanking a lot of very important groups, beginning with the Midland Cultural Center. Dan Broom, I hope, is in the room, and I wanted to thank he and his entire team for being such fantastic partners over the past year, making possible the MyTax research initiative, and being so helpful, collaborative, and incredibly resourceful as we're starting to pull this together. And for today's activities, I'd also, of course, like to thank the volunteers that have worked on this so effectively, as well as Michelle and I think Siobhan, Glenn, thank you for your technical help. We couldn't have done it without you, and we look forward to more and more. I'd also like to thank the town of Midland and North Simcoe. The town of Midland, more than a year ago, supported the creation, the development of a detailed feasibility study to assess how this could be done, a Georgian Bay Geopark. Nick and I were deeply involved in the development of that, as were others. So we have a big head start, and it's thanks to Midland and North Simcoe for making that happen. I'd also like to thank Canadian Geoparks, which is an organization that has been set up to support aspiring geoparks, which you can refer to us as. We've been acknowledged and recognized by UNESCO as an area that absolutely deserves to be a UNESCO geopark. We have to prepare and meet certain standards over the next couple of years, and they are a model for resourcing and support and technical know-how. I'd also like to thank MyTax, which is a federal organization that funds research, as well as the Georgian Bay Land Trust, who are our first conservation research group to collaborate with. And of course, U of T, which has made so much of this possible through Nick's leadership and the depth of knowledge and expertise. I just want to reinforce that Nick, by the way, very modest guy, despite his age, is known as the foremost expert in the geology of the Great Lakes, and in particular Georgian Bay. So we're so lucky to have him. And lastly, we've been raising funds. We are a volunteer group at this time, and the Young Family Foundation have started our whole campaign, and we want to thank them as well. Specifically, we have a number of people who are on our working group. From the Midland area, it's Jack, as well as Stu Spires. We have David Sharp and James Dobin, Mike Robbins, who is both from Collingwood and has a cottage in the local area, John Bocage, who Jack has mentioned, who I think resides up in Shawniga, and we've got some brilliant people on the planning and architecture side, including John Van Ostrand, James Dobin. Ian Rind is here. Thank you, Ian, for your support. And who am I missing? Janet Lahid, who helped put all of this together. So my point is that this is a working group. It is an expanding working group, and we are going to hopefully be recruiting some more people to make this go. So in closing, I'd like to say thank you again, and I would ask that the Senator comes back to finish our proceedings today. Thank you.
What a fascinating afternoon. Wonderful. Thank you. We just close off in prayer. O Lord, our Lord, How majestic is your name in all the earth. We again thank you for your magnificent creation. We thank you for the lives of all who've worked so hard in the development of this geopark. We recognize their talents and determination to see the accomplishment of this astounding geopark. We know that people of all ages, all diversities, education, of every walk of life will be inspired by this wonderful undertaking. We pray your blessing upon all and their families. Everything you do is good. This land reflects your beauty and strength, for you are known as our rock. You carve the rivers out of the rocks. You make the streams glad. This is our homeland. We're truly thankful. Merci. Miigwech.
Thank you very much. I would like to also thank again the fantastic drummers that kicked things off and got us into the spirit of this. Thank you again to the Chickamick drummers. And I would also like to point out that in terms of next steps, we do want to start that dialogue with you. Today we're launching GeorgianBayGeopark.com. So if you want to be reminded of what you heard and learned today, you can go there. It also provides a survey, which we would love you to fill out. It will help us understand where we are. It will also get us your names and emails, which is very important. But also let us know what your interest is, if you are a citizen or if you are part of an organization or a government. And we're going to start the process, I hope, of connecting with you and moving ahead with the geopark in this region. So with that said, I'd like to thank you again, and I would welcome anybody to ask a question or a comment, and we'll take it from there. I don't know that there's a mic in the audience, so I just ask you to stand up and let her go. Go ahead. Lights, please. There we go. Yes, the question is this the first time out for this? And the answer is yes. 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 Yes, it's starting a history that begins 2 billion years ago. But the answer to your question about whether we intend to connect with those important destinations and institutions here, the answer is yes, because we think that the platform gives voice to places that have that historical record and those narratives, including First Nations. And I think Jack was emphasizing quite a bit the storytelling that we think is going to be central to this geopark and the geopark experience. Yeah. Well, would you mind stating your name too as you begin?
My name is Jim Wilgar. Been a long time voter and even a high school teacher here in the Midland area. So I've been long interested in, I must commend the tremendous work that's being done by yourselves on the stage and many others. You know, you talk about a geopark and you talk about it in the context of Georgian Bay. And Jack talked about that amazing history that we are now able to enjoy. Midland itself has a park, but it's soon going to be covered in condos. I'm talking about the Midland Bay Landing. What a tragedy. That is a tragic thing, and in my mind, it's one of those sites that could in fact be developed into something that fits very well into what you're doing. It's unfortunate that what here's an election coming up.
Thank you very much. Yes, sir.
My name is Bob Ramsey. In terms of UNESCO approval, do you think this is a long shot or a slam dunk?
I'll ask Nick to answer that.
I think it's a slam dunk. We keep tabs on other aspiring. There's a lot of work involved. That's why we call them perspiring geoparks. But I keep tabs on what's happening across the rest of Canada. And I think I can safely say that Georgian Bay is up there, if not the best one. It's going to be the largest one in Canada. It's going to be the most diverse in terms of geology. You've got the cultural aspects, which you don't have in a lot of other geoparks. So I think it is a slam dunk. It doesn't mean to say it's going to be an easy process. But it is a great opportunity to tell a global audience that this place is pretty important. We all know it's special. And as Tony said, it's education. Was it Joni Mitchell said that you don't know what you've got till it's gone? And I think that's the case. You can't preserve something until you know something about how it functions, the ecosystems of the bay, all dependent on the geology, the contrast between the shield and the southern areas, the cultures reflect that. I think the more we get that message out into schools and into the public, and they can access information through these hubs, then I think we've got educated citizenry, we've got guardians of the environment, and maybe like the thing you mentioned in Midland might not happen again. So I think that's a key role of the park, just education. And the park itself can't preserve. I think Tony might want to touch on that, what the park is and isn't. There's no hard boundaries, there's no wardens. We're having discussions about how big the park should be, and it may end up at the geosites. You remember the map with all the geosites on? That might actually be the park itself. But certainly it's going to. We've got this, the fourth largest city in North America. It's just down the road, so the development pressures are going to increase on Georgian Bay. You all know that. I think the Geopark will play a fundamental role in ameliorating development and making the development that much better.
Yes, sir.
Can you develop the notion of a geosite a little bit more fully for us?
Yep.
After a particular location has become a geosite, what will be different about it than the way it is now?
Do you want to answer that?
Well, just to go through some of the aspects of a given place. So let's take Giant's Tomb. It obviously is a destination for thousands of people. What we would do as one of the geosites is to represent the story of Giant's Tomb in a very thorough way. We would give people from a distance a really deep sense of Giant's Tomb, both in terms of a physical experience of being there or feeling like you've been there, but also understanding its history, its ecology, of course the geology of it, and its cultural significance within First Nations indigenous peoples.
Would there be interpretive materials on Giant's Tomb?
We would prefer not. And I say that because we believe that if you think about 10 years ago compared to today, the cell phone in your hand is basically your window into any information you ever want. And so we think the best guide to any of these sites is going to be with a mobile phone.
We might be able to organise the geosites into coherent, systematic tours that you could do. Like the Great Circle tour around the bay. You could, if you're in your car, you could listen to the tape, which will know where you are and will give you information, that sort of thing. But I think we are pretty conscious about the need to not have boots on the ground in some areas.
If I get the idea right, the site won't be much different, but a lot more people will know a lot more about it.
Yeah.
That's the point.
Yeah, without necessarily visiting it. So they could be in Europe or wherever. And
So
that increases the status and importance of Georgian Bay.
Gentleman at the back?
Thank you. I'm Sean. I'm from Georgia National Park.
Don't understand.
I live in a little town called Wabashine, and Wabashine is the First Nation where it means where the rock meets the water, or the water meets the rock. And our park straddles those two equal zones.
Just move it over to the side, the gentleman at the back.
Which is pretty unique out in the area. And the First Nations, it was a gathering place for thousands of years on the island itself, but we also utilize both people's zones.
Mhm.
Gather food stuff and utility and that sort of thing. But my question is, you talked about earlier about the tectonic plates or tectonic plates. How many times have they crossed the Earth back and forth in millions of years, billions of years?
Well, that's a difficult question, so I'm going to pass it on to Kirsten. Well, we know, the Earth is 4.5 billion. There's a lot of debate about when plate tectonics actually started, and the consensus is it's probably about 3 billion before that. People talk about stiff lids and the Earth's surface, the crust being too hard, rigid to allow plates, but maybe 5 supercontinents. In each supercontinent cycle, which we know is about 750 million years, the continents migrate around the globe. So Ontario has been across the equator probably at least 5 times. It's a journey.
Just my last point about Pangea.
Ah,
How the Earth has, we call North America Turtle Island now.
yes.
And it's amazing how our First Nations people noticed it was a turtle ship without thousands of years ago, without even being. You could only see it from the air. Back then, of course, there was no planes or anything like that. And that's very interesting. It does look like a turtle that you saw on the map of North America. And also, how old or how many square kilometers would be the Asian shield?
Well, let me answer that.
I did some research on it, and some of the research that I did is that would it be possible that the bottom of the Grand Canyon would be possibly how far it goes into the Earth?
Yeah, that you're absolutely right, because the shield is only the tip of the iceberg. And you remember the cover rocks? That shield surface goes underneath the cover rocks. It goes all the way down to Mexico, Texas. It's about 13 kilometers down in some places. But if you walk down through the Grand Canyon, and we've done this many times with students, about halfway down there is the top of the Canadian Shield. They're the same rocks as what we have here. So we're going to propose that we actually go back and reclaim that.
All right, anyone else? Yes, sir.
My name is Claire Bellator, and I'm interested, Unesco is on the east side of Georgian Bay, the archipelago. Unesco is on the west side with the escarpment. You're proposing to involve Unesco in a broader way around the bay. Can this initiative prevent TC Energy from carving into the escarpment at Meaford to build its proposed pump storage plant?
Thank you. The answer to the first question about collaboration with existing UNESCO biospheres or the like, this is in fact a relatively common phenomena in other parts of the world. And the experience is that the addition of a geopark in concert with other UNESCO initiatives is additive as opposed to competitive. So what we are going to be doing is sitting down with the organizations you've mentioned and figuring out commonly a plan about how this can work for both the launch of a geopark and to enhance the activities of the biosphere. As far as the political end of it goes, maybe that's, I can ask Kirsten. No. Sorry. I don't mean to be glib. You were going to answer it. Our view is we use the term resilience. Creating a geopark may enhance the resilience of communities. And I think that the ability to create an understanding of the importance of Georgian Bay among the citizens of Georgian Bay will allow the communities to look at developments through a slightly different lens. So if there's a political process afoot, we think that the Geopark is a great contribution because it really puts science and nature on the table in a very vivid and legitimate way.
You may find that the dynamiters and the excavators are already going into the top of the escarpment outside Meaford. If this group and others don't start exerting pressure and getting some publicity about this proposal.
Thank you.
Hello.
Yes?
Hi, my name is Rebecca Sanesi. Thank you. Sorry I got to the presentation late because I was at work, so I actually missed all the information. So I apologize if my question is sort of redundant, but I'm just wondering, how does this geopark intersect with land preservation and, natural land preservation? And because as my friend pointed out back there, Midland Bay Landing Park is a natural space, and it's unfortunate that a scientist has to say that a space is good for people, a natural space is good for people, when the World Health Organization says natural spaces are good for people. And in terms of preserving land, I'm wondering how you can sort of intervene with this Midland Bay Landing development, because they're planning on placing concrete all across the shore and a park behind the condos. So it's actually really important that somehow you guys intersect with these things that are being planned now, because it's going to be too late and you can never get it back, and I think we all understand that.
I have no argument or comment on the problem that you're describing as far as the development project. But first of all, we are not an established geopark. This is the beginning of the story. UNESCO geoparks do actually not have any kind of legislative authority, unfortunately. They have moral authority, you could argue. They have science authority. But there is nothing in my understanding of geoparks worldwide, and I'll figure out if there's an exception to this and be glad to get back to you, where they've actively intervened. It may be that there are some that take on a kind of political activist point of view, but generally speaking, that's not the case.
Maybe it could be the start of a collective though, so I'd like to get your information at the end.
Sure.
Excuse me, sir, there's a few of us up here that have.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Quick question, you had indicated that you think this is a slam dunk. On a provincial, federal, and municipal level, has everybody contributed and voted yes on this before going to the public?
No.
So how is it a slam dunk?
No, it's not but the question had to do with approval from UNESCO.
Yeah, the science, the straight.
And UNESCO has its qualifications, its 100 things that you have to basically check off. And you have to have significant geology and proven on a global basis. But it's not about municipal approvals.
Yeah, there's no land ownership or involved. It's simply making a case that this is a globally significant part of the world. There's still much to be learned from it.
So UNESCO has taken an interest in Midland specifically, and you're coming to the people for backing, and then
No.
provincial support?
No, I think, we're trying to take a pan-Georgian Bay approach, recognizing that it is a region. The geology makes sense, the culture makes sense. So that's the approach we've taken with UNESCO. So we haven't picked winners and losers, if I can use that expression. Midlands have been very helpful to us. We've had partnership with the Cultural Centre. But we are looking to develop other partners around the Bay too. Tony mentioned hubs, the dissemination of information. So it's strictly science at the moment.
And I would also just emphasize that UNESCO hasn't come here and said this is something that we being UNESCO must develop. It's a number of volunteers that have come forward just because of an understanding and an affection for Georgian Bay.
Does that help?
Can I say something?
It opens up a lot more questions. Go ahead.
Yes, sir.
There's two more up here.
Okay, I'll get right back.
Thank you. My name is Sandy Agnew, and it's very fascinating, by the way. I really enjoyed the presentation.
Thank you.
There's another geological feature that I don't know how this fits in with you, but just down the road here, we have the Waverly Uplands, which is basically a drumlin, I think, and it's, you probably know all about it. But the water, we have several scientists that are wanting to study that water.
Yeah.
It's been tested already to be the purest in the world. Is this an aspect that fits in with your geopark?
Yeah, very much so, because what Kirsten's doing in mapping the glacial topography will lead to much more information about the origins of the drumlins, what's underneath the geology, and that will provide a lot of background information for the hydrogeology, the soils, the rocks that the water's flowing through. So that's a really good example where this initiative will provide a lot of information that can be used by members of the public, by municipalities, conservation groups. So that's a really good example right there of the advantage of the Geopark. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes?
Yes, what I see here today is a committee trying to sell an idea to the public of this town. An idea that I feel you're already very confident about implementing in this town. Now, I must tell everyone here that what these individuals are talking about is a United Nations effort to bring in a foreign entity to control our waters and our shores. And I would urge everyone in this room to read up on Agenda 2030 and Agenda 2021 and make sure they have a good understanding of the plans, the global plans that are being implemented as we speak, of which these individuals are part of, that are going to affect your lives and not in a positive way, and no one's going to be happy in the future if you don't stop it now.
May I ask you, would you mind sharing your name?
Silva.
Silva.
Yes.
Thank you. I just want to point a couple of points of fact out as it relates to the scenario that you've just painted. We are not a department of UNESCO, nor does the UNESCO Geopark have any legal jurisdiction or clout to do some of the things that you're suggesting.
So why is it involved?
Pardon me?
And what are the duties and obligations of the individuals or the government of this area and the people of this area have towards your program, if in fact UNESCO has nothing to do with it?
Well, I would be glad to send you the things that are required for a UNESCO Geopark to be recognized. And they include things related to education, to the legitimacy of the sites and the geology, and the like. So those are really very directional requirements, and none of it ends up, if I may, with the ability or clout that the UNESCO Geopark would have to stop the activities that the municipality of Midland have set out in their plans. We do not override governments.
So where does the funding for this implementation come from?
Well, currently the funding comes from citizens right now supporting the volunteer group. The Geopark feasibility study, which I took part in writing, was funded by North Simcoe and the town of Midland.
Okay, so then you're in cooperation with the town, so we should talk to the town. And another, I have a question for the young lady there about this drone that you're using. I know it has a very fancy technical name, but that drone and scanning.
Can't understand you. Speak more clearly, please.
Yeah, well, the drone that you are going to be utilizing to scan the shore and the rocks and all the history that we have in this area doesn't sound to me to be very private, because you're talking about land and rocks and water, but there are going to be people walking these lands, these rocks, and this water. And are they protected from being photographed by this drone?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you, and every time I go out to drone a site, I get permission from the landowners. I'm very cautious about where I actually collect my data. So far I've been working a lot in big open farms, I've been talking to the landowners, and I make sure that I'm not taking anything that people would be sensitive about.
Do you have a record of these landowners that you've spoken to? And
Yes, I do.
Can I have a copy?
All right, thank you. Next question, please. Thank you, sir.
Yes, my name is Brent Graham.
Okay, yep, you bet.
Yeah, my name's Brent Graham. I live in the area as well. I was very involved with French's Hill, or the Waverly Uplands, specifically looking at getting a UNESCO World Heritage designation for that entity. World Heritage, though, not Geopark. So I'd have to say with Silva, I think it's hard when you're up on the panel and somebody says something like that. I completely disagree with him. So having worked with UNESCO on that submission, which we decided not to pursue for various reasons, but I never felt that there was any threat to how we manage the resources or anything like that. But I did want to ask, because I looked at the World Heritage Site designation, it was every 10 years you were allowed to submit a request for that. So I'm curious about the timing with the geoparks. Is there some kind of timing constraint in terms of when you can ask to be?
If I may, thank you. I can also direct you to the GeorgianBayGeopark.com, because that will take you to the Canadian Geopark site, which specifies the kinds of requirements. And I also studied the Geopark trajectory for approval, let's call it that, in different parts of the world, including in Canada. And you have to be operating, quote, as a geopark. In other words, have them identified and ability for people to see them and have different things in place. And as Nick alluded to earlier, UNESCO comes over and sees the degree to which you are fulfilling that. They actually have a list of 100 requirements, let's call them, research, education, and the like. And you have to have completed those or be well on your way, and they come and evaluate like a report card. So based on that, and also we're tightly connected to Whistler, which is doing the same thing, and they are 3 years in the making. We think the projection of becoming an operating geopark is 2 or 3 years out max, and then UNESCO has to come and evaluate us, and they have a certain limit to the number of new UNESCO parks in Canada per year. And if you, I can let you know what that is, but it's probably 3 or 4 per year max.
If I can make one other point.
Yeah.
With the World Heritage Site designation, UNESCO would protect the entity that was given that designation. There were lots of examples where they actually did that. They had no authority to override governments or whatever they want to do, but they would take the steps necessary to bring it to attention and debate about it.
Yep.
In order to protect it.
No, and I appreciate that. I mean, the people were taking, brickwork off the Borobudur. So it's fortunately not the same scenario with a geopark. Yeah. Sorry, yes.
Yeah, when I speak stones, I have a lifetime interest, unfortunately, in sustainability, ecological sustainability. And so my question comes from that perspective. You talk about sustainability, which I was happy to hear that you entered that word into the conversation here. But, tourism is not necessarily a benign activity. And I get the impression that you attract a lot of tourism. It isn't benign. Whether it's cottage development or if it's just casual day use. So people like myself would like to be involved in this process to engage and challenge that notion and to ensure that there is sustainability incorporated into this. I have a strong working knowledge about the UNESCO site in Claycoat Sound in Tofino. And yes, they have a presence there at the UNESCO site. There was a lot of industrial use of the waters and the ecology of the area, tourism and fish farming that aren't sustainable, and they're expanding some of these entities. So I have a working knowledge that it's not, sustainability is a very difficult thing to achieve.
Indeed.
And I challenge you to invite me to be part of a panel so we can have this conversation and scrutinize a little bit stronger what sustainability means to this organization.
Great. Yes,
Thank you
so,
very much.
well, and thank you. And in case you did not hear it, the question, well, really the statement was that sustainability in the context of tourism is not an easy thing. Tourism is generally a relatively high impact activity. And does this not mean that there will be more tourism here and therefore more high impact? So we'd welcome the opportunity to sit down with you. Our intention is that by creating a genuine aura of respect and importance for Georgian Bay, that we're creating a climate or an atmosphere that can influence the way people approach Georgian Bay, whether you're living here or visiting. And that is one very important intent of a UNESCO Geopark. The experience in other places has been that it is a certain kind of tourism that is attracted because of the Geopark. And this is where I would defer to expertise to understand what you've learned about what hiking is as an impact and so on. But I think the overriding feeling is that the population of the Greater Toronto Area is going to be pushing 10 million people by the mid-40s. And how whatever happens, the pressures on Georgian Bay, south, mid, and north, are going to intensify. And this is an important initiative to create a framework and a bay-wide approach that improves the conditions and the probability of resilience in the face of all of that.
Question?
Sorry, yes?
I came in halfway through your presentation. I apologize for that. The sponsors up there were Simcoe County and the town of Midland, which is great. We're reaching out to Bruce County, Tobermory, Wyerton, and all around. And what municipalities have signed up already?
We're at the very beginning of the process.
Okay, well, we're gonna go and see Perrystown.
Indeed.
Okay, and
Yeah.
we're kicking it off.
You are. This is the first town hall.
Fantastic.
Thank you. Yes?
Hi there, my name is Yvonne. Can you explain to me what UNESCO stands for, the actual
Yep.
acronym, and then what you actually will be selling? Because the Midland Bay Landing that everyone is actually talking about, we have 40 acres that will be at some point in time looked over by developers. And what we're trying to find out is, with that development, which could take up to 5, 10, how many ever years, at what point would you actually come in and save some of that parkland?
I'm afraid that we wouldn't be able to do that. But to answer you, the first part of the question was, what does UNESCO stand for? UNESCO is the United Nations Education, Science, and Cultural Organization. And it is the only organization in the UN network that has its own parliament, representation from all the countries in the world. So that's how significant in 1947 the world thought it was to have an entity that was focused on culture, education, and science. No UNESCO Geopark, unfortunately, has any interventionist power.
And at what point, when you do decide to come in and create this geopark for us, how much are you looking at the town providing to you, and will that come from taxpayers' money, or is that going to be funded through other ways?
The answer is yes. It's both possibilities exist. Some funding from municipalities, but we're not relying on that. Some funding from citizens, but there are also significant funds that have been tapped by other geoparks in Canada from federal and provincial governments as well as foundations. So the financing model is quite varied from place to place, but generally speaking, municipalities are not the primary funder.
And are there minimums that are paid to you or UNESCO? I did see on one of the websites that there's a minimum requirement yearly to be paid to UNESCO. it didn't say to what or whatever, but it said like a minimum of $1,000 or whatever. Do you know a pricing that we would have for that UNESCO Geopark name, or to have your entity come in and be in our area?
Well, to be honest, I am not aware of UNESCO requiring a payment for the use of their brand, but I will look into that, because that would be a bit of a surprise. And yet I don't think they're not like a money-making organization, so I don't expect, if there is any fee, that is onerous. But again, the funding comes from a bunch of different places. I'm going to just see if there are others. Yes?
So, just for me to recap, it seems to me that this is an initiative to bring different groups together, cultural groups, scientists, so that an increased love for the space is brought forward, and then the citizens will work with that, according to how we work with the Geopark. So we have to stand up and take our place in this.
Well put. Thank you very much.
Sorry, we didn't hear that. Maybe you could.
All right. I could not possibly do as well.
That was great.
I'm not known for repeating.
Okay, well, the point was that the assumption is that a UNESCO Global Geopark really relies on people in the regions who love the particular place, in this case Georgian Bay, to participate in it, along with others who are motivated by their affections and their concerns for the future of Georgian Bay. And this is definitely a community-driven idea.
And the bringing of science together with culture, I think that's the other point that you raised.
And so
Okay.
the individual can fit in whatever way
Yeah.
is appropriate
Yep.
for that individual.
Yes.
It's obviously going to be fraught with questions and
Mhm.
concerns, but still.
All right, I'll take one more question. I think we should wrap up, if you don't mind. Yes?
I was just wondering, because typically with Geoparks, an outreach element to school children.
Can I ask Nick or Kirsten to talk about schools?
Yeah, I could just introduce Kirsten. She spent an awful amount of time in the last few years developing teaching modules. So again, there's a lot of information out there in Georgian Bay. People don't know how to access it. But she would like to say a few words about these modules, which will be online and anybody can access.
Yeah, so we've already developed a number of sort of module lessons that can be used by instructors in schools. They're all sort of online for now. They've got lectures and problem sets and activities to do. So we've already started working on that, and we'd like to get into schools as much as possible, I think, get people interested in geology early.
Yeah, for any high school teachers sitting here that could use that information, we'd love to talk to you, yeah.
So I'd like to just remind everybody that there is now a website, georgianbaygeopark.com, and on that we would love to hear from you. There is a survey, a short but helpful survey, an opportunity to sign up for a newsletter and to share with us your email. We want your ideas and your stories and your participation. And we would also invite you to hang around for a few minutes and maybe we can talk before you leave. So I want to thank you again for all of your time, and thank you for